here. This was the covenant. So he said, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, receive the reward." Ain't nobody up in heaven now or in the lake of fire. Man goes right back to the ground. Leviticus chapter 19. And yeah, just verse 17, when it sounds like everybody is pretty much there.
Leviticus 19, verse 17.
Brother, without a cause. So here we reading back in Leviticus. Well, yeah, we'll go back there in a couple scripts.
Yeah,
but all right, Matthew 5. Well, it's a long lesson, but hopefully not all day. Matthew 5 and pick it up at 27.
27. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart.
All right, so another one, the man and the woman. This, they tried to bring a woman to Jesus. But he's saying not only not to commit adultery, but just to look on a woman to lust after her, he's committed adultery already with her already in his heart. Now we're going to take a look at something, because again, for the first, we'll say most of these commandments had a literal punishment. Mm-hmm. But what we're going to look at now is actually already dealing with this back in the Old Testament, but it's something that, you can't necessarily tell if somebody is doing it. It's hard for you to tell, but he's speaking to the individual. See, the Lord knows what's on your mind and heart. Mm-hmm. He tried the reins. All right, so we and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 1. When you're ready, go ahead.
And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which hath brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. All
right, so first few commandments, the Lord is showing us how to deal with him, how to love him. And he said to have no other gods before him or make any graven images. Y'all know that, the Catholic Church actually has taken this one out of their Bible in half. Mm-hmm. But go ahead.
Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. Do these of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me. And showing mercy unto the thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. All
right, so nothing has really changed. This is what Christ came and said in John 14 and 15. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. This is what he was giving them, because this Jesus back here we know, and there's lessons to show that, but we ain't really dealing with it right now. But this is him giving Moses the commandments. Yes, and he said, showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Skip down to verse 14.
Thou shalt not commit adultery.
All right, so this is what we dealing with. He said, ye have heard it was said by them of old time. This is what he was talking about, what they call the Old Testament. And we see this is one of the commandments. Again, there was a penalty of death if people were caught in this act. But let's skip down to verse 17.
Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, or anything that is in thy neighbor's.
All right, so now we get into coveting. And what is coveting? Anybody know? There you go. I really didn't know what it meant, but it covers all of that. What's in your heart. This is the one. It was already kind of on the table, dealing with the heart. Back in the Ten Commandments, not to covet anything that is thy neighbor's, his house, nor his wife. Now remember, this is what Christ was talking about, and we're going to see in the New Testament that this is exactly what coveting is. It's lusting after something. But go ahead, verse 18.
And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood far off.
All right, so, they even asked Moses for him to deal with the Lord. Right. lest they hear his voice again and die. That's how fearful they were. And they agreed back then to do everything that the Lord had put on the table for them, this covenant. But we're going to keep jumping back and forth from the New and Old Testament because that's the title. Is there a difference between the Old and the New Testament? We're going to go over to Romans chapter 7. And we just reading one verse there, verse 7. Romans 7 and verse 7. Because we just going to see, this isn't really a modern word. I didn't know what it meant when I first read it, that's for sure. And I really wouldn't have, suspected it meant lust, but the Bible going to clear it up. 7 and 7, go ahead.
What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet.
So we know for surety now that coveting and lusting is the same thing. And this is what Christ was talking about. He said, whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery already with her in his heart. So we see it's the same thing. It was already on the table. Christ had to come and show us how to live this thing out and bring us a fuller understanding of the law. But even that's, that shouldn't have really been a surprise. That was already written. And we're going to get to that. But first, we back to Matthew 5. Because we're going to see that a lot of these things, they were already written. Man may not have understood it because, again, there wasn't penalties on the table for covetousness. How do you, really deal with that? Only the Lord know if you coveting something. But Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to pick up at verse 31. Matthew 5 and 31. When you're ready, go ahead.
It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cost of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her, that is the divorce, commits adultery.
All right, so again, he's referring to the Old Testament. He said, it hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. So that's what he's talking about, a man divorcing his wife. And this was something that was written in the law. And it was always a man that, was divorcing the wife, not the other way around.
Right.
But even still, this was something that Moses had allowed them to do, as we're going to find out. But we're going to see that really, even back in the very beginning, it wasn't so. So he said, but I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving or except for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery. All right, so let's go over and read about this. I think I might have missed. Nah, it's in there. We're going to go to Matthew 19. I be needing a place marker sometime. I don't know why I can't remember which one I'm on. But Matthew chapter 19.
I got you.
All right, appreciate you. And we're going to pick it up at verse 3. Matthew chapter 19 and verse 3. When you're ready, go ahead.
The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?
All right, so they was always trying to, get Jesus caught up with the law, trying to, get him to answer something contrary to Moses' law. So that's what they asking. Can a man divorce his wife, in other words, for any reason? Go ahead.
And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning?
When?
Which made them at the beginning?
At the beginning. So it don't get no more Old Testament than that, as we're going to see. He talking about Genesis. But go ahead.
Made them male and female. and said, For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be twain, and they shall twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder.
All right, so this is Jesus referring to something all the way back in Genesis, right after God had created man. And he said, you know, once a man and a woman come together, they one in his eyes. That's why even in the New Testament, you know, it lets you know not to make your members, you know, like one with a harlot or something like of that nature. You know, if you serving the Lord and he's dwelling in your temple. So again, we see that Moses, he put this a way for, you know, for couples to get divorced, but he said from the beginning it wasn't so. Go ahead.
Verse 7. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command us to give her written of divorcement and to put her away? He is safe unto them. Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her, which is to put away, both doth commit adultery.
Okay, so same thing he said in Matthew 5. He ain't changing nothing. And I don't know, I've heard people speculate as to what was going on back then, but I can't say. I don't think we can really read any accounts. But whatever it was so bad that he gave them this way out of it. So we're going to go back and read that in Deuteronomy chapter 24. And we're going to see that even, you know, the Lord was dealing with him right away.
Right.
He was about to kill him for forgetting to circumcise his son on the 8th day.
Right.
Because like Jesus say in the New Testament, to whom much is given, much is required. So, you know, even when he got a little heated at Israel, you know, where he was supposed to be giving them water from out the rock, he was supposed to speak to the rock, and he ended up smiting he hit the rock twice and said, you know, must we fetch you water to drink? He called the people rebels. You know, he ended up not being able to go into the land just for that.
Yeah, you're going to pay for that.
Yeah, so it's not like, you know, he just did this without the Lord knowing, or like you know, obviously the Lord allowed him to do so. And we're going to see he still had a hand in it. Because he said, well, all right, y'all can do this, but now you can't go any further than that. That'll be an issue with the Lord. So Deuteronomy 24, and we're going to pick it up at verse 1. When you're ready, go ahead.
When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it has come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he had found some uncleanliness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand, and send her out his house.
All right, so this is what they were quoting. So if she, you know, the first husband,
her former husband will send her away, may not.
How, you know, he's asking Israel, his people, to out, but he's still telling Israel, but return unto me. So this what they, when he had first created man. So it really, and we're going to pick it up at verse 33. And so much we haven't seen too much really differing. If anything, people just have a better understanding. But we're going to look at this one. Matthew 5 and 33. When you're ready, go ahead.
Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but thou shalt perform unto the throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by day, because thou cannot make one a nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil.
All right, so this, to leave you anymore. He might say anything, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, really. You know what I mean? Yeah, they be like good anyway. You shouldn't have to go to some, just to try. So he's saying not to swear, not to forswear thyself, and it's the same as making a vow. All right, he say, but thou shalt perform unto the Lord thine is more than of these cometh of evil. Right. All right. So let's go to us.
So you don't want you to swear because once you say something, you're supposed to do it.
Exactly. In the day of judgment. So this is what we talking about. He not talking about like cussing, but he talking about making a vow. And we're gonna see that this was pretty much hinted that it would be better not to. When you're ready, and people there, go ahead.
Verse 21. When thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord, be sin in thee.
So this is what we dealing with. This the same thing. Thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, yes, and it will be sin in thee. So again, letting us know what's the safer option. All right, because you don't have to make a vow to do anything, but you put yourself at risk if you're making a vow with the Lord in something that you're going to do. So he's going to say the same thing we just read. Go ahead, verse 23.
That which is gone out of thy lips, thou shalt.
For much money to the church or something like that. You could read about like Ananias and his wife in Acts. And I don't know what they had agreed on in your possession. Like, why are you lying to God? You're not lying to men. And, he fell down dead right there. Even you could read about, a guy that made a vow that, okay. He calls him Jethro. Jephthah? Okay, maybe that's it. But he had made a vow that if God helped him in this war, I think it was with and his daughter came out singing and dancing. And she fully understood this thing with the vows.
Yeah, so she had it on.
Yeah, she was like, hey, if you said it, she was like, just give me a little time to go. And he actually killed his own daughter because he said, he made a vow with the Lord. So we see people understood the gravity of this back then. And, this is why we should be mindful of our, basically being judged up against other people who made these type of sacrifices. You know what I'm saying? I was talking to somebody on the phone. It was like, so you mean to tell me? It didn't even start off with like religion or anything, but he will say. But as far as the like, all y'all got is some ham, for real. Like that's the only thing y'all like. I don't even think the Lord put you in that situation. Like where you get the ham from, really? But I brought up this story of Jethro, and I was like, the judgment is going to be you're going to be actually being judged, against people who have, sacrificed their lives and So I was like, don't think that's a way out with the Lord. All you got is some ham. But anyway, where we at, brother? 23. Go ahead.
That which is gone out of thy lips, thou shalt keep and perform, even a freewill offering, according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth.
All right. Yeah, Jephthah. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. And we're going to see, that even though this isn't necessarily what people call the law, Ecclesiastes, Lord has Solomon to write pretty much the same thing. Because these, and Paul's writings, obviously. But 5. All the men on the earth. He said it wasn't going to be none Ecclesiastes 5, and we're going to pick it up at verse 6 when you're ready. Oh, I'm sorry. I knew that too.
For he hath no pleasure in fools, pay their which thou hast vowed.
I pay it here, but he say that's foolish to say it and not do it. He had no. He kind of was hinting at that in Deuteronomy. He said, hey, if you forbear the vow, it ain't going to be no sin in you. So he's saying, hey, it's even better if you.
Thy flesh to sin.
And this is what we read in Deuteronomy. He said, for it would be sin in thee.
Therefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thy hands?
Because again, everything we say is being recorded. You know, so he's saying, you know, don't try to back out of it later, say you made a mistake.
Nah, they wrote it down.
The book's going to be open. And Christ say, the word that he has spoken, the same is going to judge him. And we know where.
That's it.
Let's go back to Matthew 5.
Crystal clear right there.
Yes, sir. I ain't got to say much. Eight.
Ye have heard that had been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resisteth not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also.
All right, so now we dealing with but I say unto you that ye resist not evil. So, you know what we read in Leviticus about not hating thy brother in thy heart. Even the next verse says to love. And you know, it was even written that he was going to come, and whoever didn't listen to his words, you know, they was going to have to answer for that. So ultimately, came and said, you know,
18.
chapter 18, supposed to listen to. Because again, the Lord had sanctified Israel. He had separated them. Back in the Old Testament, when he brought them out of Egypt, he said it wasn't as they had, you know, as they had learned to do among the other nations. But let's see, Deuteronomy 18.
Yep. Unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren.
We see this is Moses writing. He said the Lord was going to raise up a prophet from among them. And he said he was going to raise up lessons dealing with that. But just to name a couple, you know, at the time it would side with the enemies. And, you know, this was years later after they had a new king that didn't really know what, you know, some of Israel, Joseph, how he had helped to deliver Egypt. So he didn't know what they had done. But when Christ was born, you know, Herod, Peter was going to be born king of the Jews. You know, they several occasions he was ready. He told Moses, stand aside and, you know, I'm going to let my anger wax hot. I'm going to destroy all of them, to the point where he asked God to forgive them or to blot his own name out of the book of life. So he interceded in the Old Testament. And we're going to deliver Israel out of Egypt. He had Moses to pour out 10 plagues on Egypt. You can go to Revelation 5 and read about the Lamb of God, also called the Lion of Judah there in the same chapter, same one we talking about, how he's going to pour out plagues on the entire world. 10 plagues it was talking about back then. It was a prophet also. But go ahead, what verse?
16. According to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire any more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, they have well spoken that which they have spoken.
All right, so he said part of the reason he was going to do this was, you know, he already knew what the people was going to request anyway, but was because of what they said, you know, that they didn't want to hear his voice no more. You know, they wanted Moses to deal with it, with God, and bring the words back to him. So he said this was according to all that they desired back then. That's part of the reason he's raising up this prophet.
Like unto thee, and I will put my words in his mouth.
Oh, so he said, I'm going to put my words in his mouth. This is something, you know, that Christ said over and over. You know, he let us know his doctrine isn't his, but the Father that sent him. He wasn't speaking his own words.
that it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name.
So we're going to go and look at this in the New Testament and just confirm who this is talking about. We really breezing through. There's some reading in some of the ones a little further down, but
Lord has showed by the mouth of all his prophets that Christ has suffered.
Jesus Christ, and again, been crucified and resurrected. But he said that send Jesus Christ, which before was preached unto you. Go ahead.
God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets. The Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren, like unto me.
And we just read this. We looked at a couple of the similarities, so we know for sure it's letting us know in the New Testament who this was talking about. And go ahead, what about him?
Him shall ye hear, and all things will not hear. That prophet shall be destroyed from amongst the people.
All right, so he was going to require it of them.
Yes.
But written that Christ was going to come, not only, there in Deuteronomy, as we read all over it, it said that he was going to suffer and be killed for the people. But we see that whatever he came and said, that was what was to be followed. So anything like, turning your cheek back in the Old Testament, this is more or less just a continued thing. And, the things that he's seen was to listen to. And let's take another look at a prophet that spoke about this. Let's go over to Daniel. And we're going to start to get into really the biggest difference between the Old and New Testament. Daniel. And this Daniel chapters, they be going here to try to deal with the length of tribulation. They say the great tribulation going to be about what was going to happen to the land of Israel. And it was giving us a start at a certain time in history when King Artaxerxes gave a decree some of the Jews go home after they had been taken into the Messiah, where Jesus was going to come. But that's what that's dealing with tribulation. We're going to pick this up at verse 35. Another king did it first, but he come back word after he let him do it. They go at this time, Messiah was going to be killed with all he needs, and not for himself. Like he even, say, he didn't take it away. And he said, the blood of Lord and princess shall come, shall destroy the city and sanctuary. 7 Messiah was killed. In 788, made Israel captive to all these nations. And he said, and thereof shall be blood. Just talk how all the people going to be carried away. That's what blood talks about. You can read about it in Amos chapter 8. And he said, until the end of the war, desolations turn. Go ahead. And he's Alright, so he confirmed covenant, which is the commandment. He's talking about tribulation. But really Messiah is going to confirm the commandments with many for 7 years. So here means anointed one, right? Messiah and the word of Christ. They both mean anointed 30. Alright, so from that time, he taught for 3.5 years. That's why he's saying he's going to cut off, in the midst of what he said, he shall cause sacrifice and the oblation cease. And shall be on the eyes of Israel ain't Peter no more. He said, even to the consummation or the completion, desolate. So we see him, Messiah, cut off middle of the week. He's going to cause sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Right. One of these sacrifices happen annually, that's once a year. You know that these days are shadows, things come. But the body is of who? So of God. And this is, the main change. Or when they get there.
Into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat, which is
So he giving Aaron the way to perform this duty he had to do, because Aaron was the high priest. Again, this is all pointing at Christ, as we're going to see. But even, Moses' position, Aaron's position, the Lord, it came to fill all of these. To Aaron, thy brother, because as we read, the Lord just killed Aaron's sons. They say they offered strange fire before the Lord. He wiped both of them out. And now the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. He like, I'm going to kill you too if it's one time.
Young bullock for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put the holy linen coat, girded with the linen girdle, and with the linen mitre water, and so put them on.
All right, so he had a whole ritual way to perform this that the Lord wants. He had to take in, it say, a young
Of the children of Israel, 2 kids of the goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for the burnt offering, for himself and for his house.
All right, so the first offering he had to do was for himself.
He should take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation.
All right, so these 2 goats, they gonna be for the congregation. Go ahead.
And Aaron shall bring the goat upon which is the Lord's lot fell, and offer him for a sin offering. With the goat.
All right, so all of this, he had to, because after he sacrificed some animals for himself to clean himself up, but all of this.
Bring the bullock for the sin offering, for which is for himself, and shall meet and small, and bring it within the veil.
All right, and you can read that these incense is even pointing at the prayers of the saints. All of this had, to go and do the job that the other goat is representing here. What Christ was going to do. Go ahead.
And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord.
Go through with this thing as it was written. Go ahead. What verse?
14.
Go ahead.
And he shall take the blood of the bullock and sprinkle it with his finger upon the mercy seat eastward.
So he had to be facing east and everything. Can you imagine, how knowing that the Lord might kill you if you do it wrong? He doing everything to the T. So he had to sprinkle the blood to get that compass right. Boy.
And before the mercy seat, he shall sprinkle the blood with his finger 7 times. Count too. And then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, blood of the bullock, and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. And he shall make an atonement for the holy place, tabernacle of the congregation, when he goeth in to make an atonement in the holy place until he come out, and have made atonement for himself and for his household and for all the congregation of Israel.
All right, so nobody else could be in there either. It was only for the high priest. And this was on a day known as, this is one of God's holy days, the Day of Atonement. All right, that's why he said he's going in to make an atonement in the holy place. Go ahead, 18.
And he shall go out of the Lord and make an atonement for it, and shall take the blood of the bullock and of the blood of the goat, and hallow it from the uncleanness tabernacle of the congregation and the altar. He shall bring the live goat. And Aaron shall lay both of his children of Israel and all their trans into the wilderness. And the goat shall bear upon him all the iniquities.
Put them on the head of the live goat. So we see what they did once he was gone to cause the sacrifice, and the oblation is another word for Matthew chapter 27. Because we see where this took place at. It said this was behind the veil in the holy place. This had happened in a certain place. He told Aaron not to come back there at all. Tire was cut off, as it was worded in Daniel. Let's go over to Matthew chapter 27.
So Aaron knew all. I mean, they all came in to do. I guess when they had to sacrifice their sacrifices for their sins, he just remembered all their stuff.
Nah, I'm sure the kid stuff, anything, even in, the ignorance, they had to come bring a sacrifice. Yeah.
Just every day.
The over there.
You got some fake Levites?
Oh,
You got some fake Levites.
Yeah. The veil of the sacrifices. Right. This was letting us know, this signified that, and this is all that the Day of Atonement was really pointing to, because the blood of bulls and goats could never take away sin. We're going to read something on the way going to Hebrews. Let's stop off in 5. And we're just going to read one verse there. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Verse 10. Yeah.
For if when we were the enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his son, much more being reconciled, we shall be saved by his life.
Uh-huh.
And not only so, but we also joy in God through our Lord.
Enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his son. Much more, being reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. So we know we had two goats back then. One died. One they took into the wilderness. They said into a land uninhabited. Right? And that was all pointing at something. Where he said, no man has ascended up to heaven, but he that came down. This is all pointing at Christ when they took that other ram into this uninhabited land with all the sins on them. All right, and that's why it says, and not only so, but we also joy in God. All right, all of this was pointing at him. All right, now let's go over to Hebrews chapter 9. So, yeah, you know, it would have been tough being a Levite. You can't have no weak stomach, and this is by, you know, who your parents are.
Yep.
Yeah, so it ain't like you get to choose. Nah, I don't want to be one. Like, nah, you're a Levite. You know what I'm saying?
You do something with his blood.
Yeah, I thought surgery was kind of graphic. All right, and this is what we were reading about. You could call that the first covenant, because we're going to see some of the things it's talking about. Go ahead.
For there was a tabernacle made, and the first, wherein was there the candlestick and the table and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary.
All right, so this is what they had to carry around with them, this tabernacle. And he let us know, he said that the first part of it had these three things: the candlestick, the table, and this showbread is called the sanctuary. Go ahead.
And after the second
time, before the mercy seat. Go ahead.
Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing his service to God.
All right, so he could always go into the sanctuary to do these
without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people.
All right, so we read how he had to first, kill a bull.
While as the first tabernacle was yet
again, they just represented what was going to come to pass in the future. That's why we know into the actual heaven with God and obtained eternal life for it in heaven with the Father. Go ahead.
Verse 15. For the redemption of the transgressors that were under the first testament.
Eternal what?
Inheritance.
Inheritance. Again, this is what you're dealing with when you have a testament. And that's why you say that testament, right. Because again, it's a will. A testament is a will. It's a written declaration what you're going to receive when somebody dies. It's of eternal inheritance. So this is some of the that, because he's the mediator of the New Testament with better promises. And we're going to look at some of the promises too. But go ahead.
For where there's a testament is, while the testator liveth.
Yeah, so somebody got a will and they included you in it. You don't get anything while they still living. That's all he's saying here. And that's what testament means. And we see the two even better promises, an eternal inheritance as we read.
Right.
Go ahead.
Whereupon neither was the first testament was dedicated without blood.
So you always something got to die anytime you're dealing with it with a will. He says, so even the first one was dedicated with blood.
Spoken every precept to all the people according to the law. He took the blood of calves and goats with water and a scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both into the holy places made with hands, which are of figures of the true.
All right, so he ain't just going behind that second veil that the high priest was allowed, because that was called the holy place.
Now to appear in the presence of God for us.
All right, so we see what all of this was trying to teach Israel about what was going to come to pass in the future. All right, now let's go take a look at this role as high priest. The children of Levi for a little while. We're going to look at Melchizedek back here in Genesis chapter 14. Genesis chapter. And go ahead and pick it up at verse 1.
And it came to pass in the days of Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and the title king of nations.
You did good. Go ahead.
That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinar and Zoar.
All right, so all these people, and go ahead.
And there came one that had escaped and brother of Abner, and these were
So
confessed.
they took Abraham's. Go ahead.
And when Abram heard
His nephew.
right.
But go ahead.
And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive,
All right. So he went after me, had the Lord on his side, so he ain't need no whole bunch of people.
into Hoab, which is on the left hand of Damascus.
Abraham goes with his servant. What else happened? Verse 18.
And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought
Go ahead.
and he was the priest of the Most High God.
Okay.
And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And he blessed be the Most High God, which have delivered thy enemies into thy hand, and he gave tithes of all.
All right. So he gave him a tenth. Now you're gonna say, "Oh, give me the people." You could have it like you going. What you gonna take it from him if you don't win? You couldn't beat him. He just beat him. But go ahead. What Abram say?
And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have saved. Thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich.
So he said, "Hey, you could have everything." Except for what we already used, as he gonna say, because he said you ain't gonna have the pleasure of saying you did anything. Abram knew that this was the Lord that had blessed him. They're on like, yeah, I gave him all the stuff when he came back from the war. You know, when he didn't have a hand.
Asher, and Mamre, let them take their portion.
Tithes to this Melchizedek, because we see it said he was king of Salem. He brought forth bread and wine. Hebrews 7, indeed. So we're going to flip over to Hebrews 7. And when it
kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first by being an interpretation king of the righteousness, and after that also the king of Salem, which is king of peace.
All right, so we already can see some similarities between this man and Christ. But go ahead, we're going to keep reading. But we see that he gave him a tenth of all. He said being by interpretation king of righteousness, also king of Salem. So we know, it says which is king of peace. We know when Christ was born, the wise men came looking for him that was born king of the Jews, right? Wanting to be king, right? So it say that whoever this is, go ahead.
Without father, without mother.
Hold up, he without
days, nor end of life.
Well, this don't sound like no regular man now, because it's letting us know he wasn't born and he's been around forever. Go ahead.
But like unto the Son of God, albeit a priestly
continually. And Christ came through Mary, but this is talking about he wasn't born to begin with. All right. And this is who it's talking about. That's why I say, but made like unto the Son of God. But it's really telling us that this was Christ. Not that he was like Christ. As we're going to see. Go ahead.
Spoils. And verily they that are the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they came out of the loins of Abraham.
All right, so, he comparing how Abraham on, God commanded the Levites, the descendants of Levi, to...
But he who descent is not counted from them received tithes from Abraham.
All right, so whoever... Go ahead, I'll let you finish.
And blessed him and had the promises.
Uh-huh.
Say the 6.
Oh, okay.
We keep going?
Yeah, I don't know why. It say the 15, I think.
Right. But there he receiveth them of whom that is witness that he liveth. And as I may also say, Levi also, who receiveth tithe, payeth tithes in Abraham.
Okay, so whoever this is that we reading about, it's for one, he don't come through the children of Levi. At verse 6, but he whose descent is not counted from them, talking about the Levites, received tithes of Abraham, and blessed him that had the promises, because God had made some promises to Abraham. Verse 8, talking about the Levites, he said, and here men that die receive tithes, because they were just regular flesh and blood men. He's having neither father already that he lived forever. Right. All right, go ahead. So he's saying, hey, it's almost like Levi paid this man tithes, because Abraham paid tithes, and that's how God had ordained it. But go ahead.
If therefore perfection, what further need was there of another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek, and not be called after the order of
Jesus to come if perfection was by that. Like we even read in I think that was Hebrews 9. He said that it couldn't make them perfect pertaining to the conscience. You know, these sacrifices. Go ahead.
For the priesthood being changed, there is a made of necessity to change also of the law. For he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another out of Judah.
Who sprang out of Judah?
Our Lord.
Oh, so this is who we talking about the whole time. We're talking about Jesus, also known as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, sprang forth bread and wine. And, you know, it had to be without blemish. It had to be to fit all of these criteria. A male of the first year that gave to Moses about that. Now, we could read in the Bible how where Christ came, he came with what? See, already he was taking the sacrifices off of the table, even way back there in some other places before it took place. All right, let's go over to Psalm 16. Some people call Psalms the book of Jesus. You know, the Lord had David. But like I quoted earlier, Christ said he come in the volume of the book. So let's see if this is talking through David back here in Psalms. And Joel 2 is dealing with, like, you know, around the time when the Lord returned. Joel chapter 2. And we'll pick it up at verse. Read about, you know, Christ's disciples ask him what's going to be the sign of his coming and the end of the world. And he started running it down, you know, all the things that's going to happen. And he get to a point where he say how, you know, the sun and the moon going to be dark and the stars, you know, not going to get a light. And this is where we're going to pick this up in Joel. Because this is what's going to happen right before the Lord returns. Joel chapter 2, verse 10. When you're ready, go ahead.
It's after Daniel.
Yes. Daniel, Hosea, after Ezekiel.
Verse 10. The earth shall quake before them. The heavens shall tremble. The sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And the Lord shall utter his voice before his army. It is great and very terrible, and who can abide it?
All right, so he said at 2 and 10 how the earth is going to quake before them. He talking about this army that he going to have. You know, they're going to be super deep, 200 million men just destroying everything in their path. And, you know, the Lord let him know in other places how he going to shake the heavens. So it's the same time he talking about they doing it for their own means, they think. He said, for his camp is very great, for he is strong that executeth his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible. Who can abide it? Go ahead.
Therefore also now, saith the Lord, turn ye even to me with all your heart, and with fasting, and is of great kindness, and repenteth him of evil.
All right, so he said, rend your heart and not your garments, because, you know, Israel was famous for tearing their clothes off when they get mad, ripping their shirts and stuff. He said, instead of that, just feel that in your heart. You know what I mean? Feel that type of affliction in your heart. Rend your heart. Turn unto the Lord your God, right? He said he is gracious.
Even a meat offering and a drink offering unto the Lord your God.
Hold up. Unto who? So he said first, to turn unto the Lord your God will return and repent. So we still talking about the Lord our God. And he said, hold up. He said, and leave a blessing behind him, even a meat offering and a drink offering unto who?
The Lord our God.
The Lord your God. Hold up. It sounds like it's more than one here, right? One of them going to leave a meat offering and a drink offering unto the other one, but it's called return. All right. So this is nothing new. But this is... I had another one in here, but still, we can go there in the meanwhile, though. Hebrews 2, and we'll pick it up at 17.
Might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people.
All right, so this is what he's doing as high priest. You know, and it said it was necessary, it said behooved, in other words, for him to be made flesh and blood, like it says, like his brethren, that he might be a...
He is able to succor them that are tempted.
All right, so he can help being a man on earth.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it let us know in another place he was faced, which we know that evil angels is under chains of darkness. You can't even really see examples of them popping up on people besides, back in the garden when he tempted Eve. But other than himself hath suffered being tempted, he is one. I think it's 2 John 1. Right numbers, wrong order. 1 John 2. First John 2, we're going to pick it up at verse 1, and we'll just read down.
With the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous.
All right, so again, we seeing what Christ is doing up there in heaven. He's advocating or speaking on behalf of people. And again, obviously, this ain't just presumptuous sin. This ain't just willing sin, because he already told you, my little children, these things write I unto you, that ye sin not. So he's saying not to sin, but if by accident you do sin, we have an advocate. You got somebody speaking on your behalf. He says we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And what is he?
And he is the propitiation for our sins.
Hey, he's the payment, in other words, for our sins. Go ahead.
And not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world.
Uh-huh.
And hereby we do know that we know him if we keep his commandments.
Go ahead.
He that saith, I know.
I mean, we see the commandments ain't changed. They still on the table. Again, what really changed, as we're going to see, is whose blood we under. We see Christ really, he came, he made some things clearer. They seem a little bit more difficult now, because now you got to check your mind and your heart. All right, but we see the commandments, if you don't keep them, you don't really even know them. Because that's always been the divine line. He said, hey, even the devils believe it's one God and they tremble. So obviously just believing in itself ain't enough. All right, but we're going to show something that stayed the same. Let's go over to Leviticus chapter 4. Now that we see whose blood we under, that we don't sacrifice animals anymore. We see how this Day of Atonement was pointing to Christ and his role as high priest. How he's advocating on our behalf. Let's go back to Leviticus. We're going to look at these sacrifices. And this would just happen anytime somebody sinned in ignorance.
Any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which are not to be done, and shall do against any of them. If the priest that is anointed to do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring forth for his sin which he has sinned a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, and shall lay his hands upon the bullock. His head, and shall kill the bullock before the Lord.
All right, so we looking at, and this is, it says, unto the children of Israel. So he start off talking about, well, first he say, if a soul shall sin through ignorance, in other words, or maybe unknowingly somebody sinned in ignorance. But skip down to verse 13 and go ahead.
And if the whole
tricked one time into making a league, an agreement with some people. The people lied to them. They did the most. When Israel, the Lord was with Israel, had them beaten by, because they didn't really consult him first. That was.
And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on it.
Oh, my fault. We were supposed to skip. You skip down to 22.
22 before the veil. Okay, 22.
Yes, sir.
22. When a ruler has sinned and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the, or if his sin wherein he has sinned come to his, and he shall lay his hands upon the head of the goat and killing.
Right, so we see that with all of these examples, it start off talking about the priest or the whole congregation. It talk about if a ruler sin. But again, like we just read at 23, it said, or if his sin wherein he had sinned come to his knowledge. So this was always something that was done in ignorance. This is what the sacrifice was for. This is the type of sins that Numbers 15 and pick it up at verse 28.
To make an atonement for him, and it should be forgiven him.
All right, so we same law. Whether you were homeborn an Israelite, it was a mixed multitude that left Egypt, and they all had to follow one law. Right. But again, he said, you shall have one law for him that sinneth through ignorance, both for him that is born among the children of Israel, and for the stranger that sojourneth among them. Go ahead.
But the soul that doeth aught presumptuously, whether he be born in the land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from amongst his people. All
right, so he said that soul to do aught is to say anything presumptuously or willingly, in other words. It don't matter where they from, and it's examples of that. But he said the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people. And it remained the same.
One more verse.
Oh, go ahead. He said his iniquity was going to be upon him. And it's not that the Lord can't have mercy, you know, on somebody, because we got examples. Right, true indeed. True indeed.
Yeah, that's what they teach you.
Man, I won't even go there. But,
Hebrews 10.
Yeah, Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to pick it up at verse 1.
For the law having the shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of it, continually make the...
I always say Paul, but it don't say who wrote Hebrews. The writer of Hebrews, he said that for the law having a shadow of good things to come. So we've been seeing how, you know, some of the things in the law point to Jesus. We looked at the Day of Atonement. We looked at some of these sacrifices just now. But he said, and this is what he's talking about mainly, the Day of Atonement, because he said, can never with them sacrifices which they offer year by year. But even if it's the regular ones that we just read about, they couldn't make...
Not have ceased to be offered.
They would have stopped offering them if they were able to make...
Had no more conscience of sin.
See, a bull tempted, you know, like we are. So he said, for then would they not have ceased to be offered, because that the worshippers once purged should have had no more conscience of sins. Go ahead.
But in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. Wherefore wouldst not, but a body thou hast prepared me.
So when who cometh into the world? Christ, right? He said, you ain't never want no sacrifices. He said, but you prepared a body for me. This was the sacrifice all of that was teaching us about. Go ahead.
But in burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, thou hast had no pleasure.
Right, the animals wasn't the ones sinning. It was man. So he had to come as man, as we read, it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren. Go ahead, skip down to verse.
Offerings for sin thou wouldest not, neither hadst thou pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Then he said, lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away first, that he may establish the second. All
right, so this is why we don't kill animals no more. This is why he had Daniel to write. He was going to cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease when he was cut off. All right, so he said, then said he, lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first. And this is what he was dealing with. We read over in the 9th chapter of Hebrews earlier. He said that the first covenant had these ordinances and a worldly sanctuary and all of that. He started to place the...
We are sanctified through the offering of the body of...
Or every time somebody sinned in ignorance, he's alive and with the Father, like that live goat represented, right? Like we read, he's advocating on our behalf. So this is what that was pointing to. All right, but skip down to verse
26.
Yeah.
And if no more sacrifices for sin.
All right, so this is the same guideline that the sin was predicated on before, was things done in ignorance, in Numbers, that the person that do anything presumptuously, they've reproached the Lord. After that, we have sacrificed for sins. All right, so this Romans 7, where Paul said, made sin exceeding sinful now, because now that he know what, you know, what not to do. Now for him to do that, let's go over and look at some of the promises under this new covenant. We're going over to Revelation 2 because we have read about an eternal inheritance earlier. And we're going to take a look at a couple things in there. Revelation chapter 2, pick up at verse 7. When you're ready, go ahead.
To him that overcometh, I will give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God.
All right, skip down to verse 11. So, this the same, this the tree of life, which man lost access to back in Psalm 69 and 4. But Christ say he came to restore that he took not away. And you can even read, when you get to the end of Revelation, he say, blessed are they that keep his commandments, right?
That do the commandments.
Yeah, that do the commandments, that they might have access.
Right to the tree of life.
The right to the tree of life, and they'll be able to eat of that. Go ahead, skip down to 11.
Second death.
All right, so they won't have to worry about the lake of fire. Skip.
To the churches. To him that overcometh, I will give to eat of the hidden manure, saving he have.
What this stone is about, or what type of, power comes with it.
Yep.
We know it say that the Lord had a name written that no man knew when he returned. And we know we're going to be able to get a body like his, right? Paul said he able to change our vile body, that it might be fashioned like unto his glorious body. So,
and to him I will give power over the nations.
Mm-hmm.
And he shall rule them with their power shall they be broken to shivers, even as I receive of my Father.
All right, so he let us know he received this of his Father. And you could read about this he promised to him in Psalm 2. He had said how the kings of the earth and the rulers set themselves against the Lord and his anointed, and he let them know, yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. And he promised to Christ, he said, ask of me, and I'm going to give you the uttermost, places of the earth for thy possession and things like that. He said, and you're going to rule them with a rod of iron. Mm-hmm. So he given that same authority to those that overcome. He said, as I received of my...
Revelation 3, verse 5. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment. And I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels.
All right, and this, like we even read in Psalm 16, he said that the people that hasten after another God, he not going to offer they blood offerings, they drink offerings. Christ got to do, for somebody to be. And I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Got one more verse, 21. Go ahead.
Yes, also I overcame, and I am set down with my Father in his throne.
All right, so we see some of these better promises that we can read about in this new covenant in the new Jesus name.
No difference. Go to the offering box along with your donation. Please see one of the brothers in the sound room for the following week for your requested copy. Lessons from all ICOJ locations online via YouTube or the ICOJ website. If you feel you are ready to be baptized, please sign the baptismal list on the table in the hallway in plain view. If you are interested in presenting a 30-minute class or interested in helping, please let us know. The following is dress code for our services. Our clothing should be modest in appearance, nothing tight head coverings, and the women should wear a head covering, such as a head and a scarf, according to 1 Corinthians 11, verses 1 through 7. If a young child becomes noisy or restless during the lesson, distracting all other offerings, envelope, and place in the offering box near the podium. Pray for our strength as we pray.
All right, I don't have anything else, so we'll do Q&A around 4:30, maybe a little before, and we can stand and close out. Brothers uncover their heads, sisters cover their heads. Stand and face Jerusalem.
Which art in heaven.
Our Father which art in heaven.
Hallowed be thy name.
Hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come.
Thy kingdom come.
Let thy
Give us this day
our daily bread.
our daily bread.
And forgive us our debts.
And forgive us our debts.
As we forgive our debts from evil.
But deliver us from evil.
For thine is the kingdom.
For thine is the kingdom.
And the power.
And the power.
And the glory.
And the glory.
In Jesus' name.
In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. Hallelujah.
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 Hallelujah.